All right, here we go. Back to Tuesday training. Here comes everybody. I'm so glad to see you guys today. Cheryl and Natasha and Lori. So did I do it right? Are you guys here? Sometimes I'm afraid that I'm starting the recording and then missing things. All right, I think we're all here. Beautiful. Hey, there you are. Nice to see you, Cheryl. Okay, beautiful. Happy Tuesday, happy Training Tuesday for practitioners. I'm so happy to be back here. This was a big cliffhanger from last week, actually. And so I'm excited to get back to what to do when muscles don't fire. And we left off right at the perfect spot last week as we were working through what causes that and what to do about it. And so we're going to pick that up here as we go. Hey, Lori, nice to see you live as well. And just before we dive in, for those of you who've not been here before, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm also really glad that those of you who were here for last week are back for the cliffhanger, which is great. I am Gina Schatz. I'm your host for the next hour. We're going to talk practitioner stuff. So specifically today, as we talked about muscles and what to do when they don't fire, and we're picking up on our conversation from last week. And every week that we're here, we talk something about functional anatomy for both manual and movement practitioners, which I am both. And along the way, working clinically, I figured out how to solve some stuff on my own. So I developed the Schatz method, and I also teach that to practitioners who are interested in that track of training as well. So welcome. I'm super glad that you're here. If you are watching on the replay, I would love it if you would let us know that you're here so that I can celebrate you while you're here, and also know that I get to support you. You can either like the video or leave a comment, leave a hand wave in the comment, whatever supports you, whatever works for you would work for me, so that I can know also that you're here and how to support you. We started this conversation last week because there was, I said a special request at the help desk. It's very official, because there was a specific question like, what do I do with this? And how do I do that? And would you talk about it? Absolutely. So if there is a particular topic that you would like me to talk about, always send that in, either by leaving it in the comment or drop me an email. Let me know, because I really love to teach what you guys want. So that makes for a really fun hour for me too. Hey, Anna, nice to see you. So if you were not here last week or you didn't catch that replay yet, I really recommend it because it was juicy and awesome. And we talked about, we started the conversation about what to do when muscles don't fire. We talked about there needs to be two different types of alignment considered in order for muscles to, Cheryl's like, yep, I remember that, in order for muscles to contract to their full capacity. We talked about the lever system and what that means for muscles to contract, and how to use the lever system to support us in contracting muscles. And then we were leaving off last week's conversation and starting this week's conversation on when to intervene when all of that, which is part of our design, doesn't work. Like when we know how the body's designed as practitioners, we can use the design to create results. Absolutely. And I highly recommend that we do that. But when we know the design and we're using the design and it's still not working, now we have to bring in the heavy guns. Now there's more to it. Lori, it looks like you're frozen, only because you haven't blinked in a while. So I hope that you're doing okay with your internet connection. Because I also, and Natasha, it's nice to see you as well. Because I know Lori, this was a big part of the question that Lori had last week. So Cheryl and Anna and Lori, that you guys are here. Also, if you're here and not on camera, totally cool. Just use the chat here, the chat feature in the Zoom room, so that we can include you in the conversation. Did you guys have any questions left over from last week on what we already covered? And the reason I ask that is not to pause and review, but as a training tip, I really recommend when you're solving problems like pain and chronic pain and resolving issues with clients, that you go with what you know, not what you think or what your hunch is. That's not what I mean. There's different places to use your intuition. But when you're solving mechanical / functional discrepancies, go with the body's design, what you know about how the body's designed, and start there first. Don't assume that because there's a problem that it's a whole, spider web of an issue that you might not be able to mine yourself through the data. It might be, but before you take yourself down a rabbit hole, go back to what you know. This is how the body's designed. This is the joint action that's happening. This is the muscle that does that. This is how I get that joint to take that movement. Always recommend that we do that first, because that could solve the problem. And then if not, then you get to go into deeper spider webs of solving problems. So for that reason, question on the table, is there any clarity that you guys would like from what we talked about last week before we dive into when that all goes wrong? Anna, what you got? Hi.
Hi. I think that the thing that was a new thing for me last week was exactly what you said about, cue to the design first of the muscle. But if that muscle is not doing its job, then go to the lever system and deal with that muscle contracting so that the muscle is supposed to do its job can lengthen first, and then go back to the muscle that's supposed to do the job, see if you can get that to contract. I think that's what was new for me, even in understanding the lever system, was that part of, if my bicep isn't working, then go to my, or not working fully, let's say, it's not flexing my elbow completely, then go to my tricep and contract that, and then see if the contraction of my tricep help my bicep to lengthen a little, and then go back and contract the bicep. That was new for me.
Yeah, that's, I'm going to reach for a rubber band while we're talking, because I think a visual on this will be really good. And that concept, Anna, that you just brought up is right at that segue mark between using the body the way it's designed and what happens when it doesn't do it, like out of the gate, right? It's still using the design, but it's like using the body's design to reset itself rather than deep diving into, oh my gosh, everything's wrong. And so that concept is muscles both lengthen and shorten. They contract and they stretch, okay? And those are interchangeable terms. And I know you've heard me talk about stretch before, but just go with this for now with the lever system. So if we use a rubber band, non-stretched, non-contracted, right? Think about the muscle spindles in muscles in this way. They have elastic qualities to them. They do, by definition. So in order for me to contract this, meaning make it small, it has to lengthen first to be able to become contracted and small, okay? Not 100% great, not 100% perfect analogy, because of course muscle spindles and a rubber band are slightly different, but just go with it for the quality of it. So in order for me to get this rubber band to be as small as it is, I have to come from a lengthened position for it to go back to contracted or small. And the same thing is true if the muscle is lengthened. I don't want to stretch it from here. I don't want to stretch it from here. I want to bring the origin and insertion where my two hands are representing. I want to bring the origin and insertion closer together. That's the design of the body. And in order for me to lengthen the muscle, it has to come from a contracted or shortened place first. I can't lengthen it from here. It's already lengthened. So I've got to contract it before I can lengthen it. And I've got to lengthen it before I can contract it. Because it's a lever. They're doing the opposites all the time. So that's right where we left off, Anna, last week. That's like using the design still, but from a little more of a sophisticated approach, which is the step after, okay, what's the muscle's job? It's to contract, it does this, contract only. Yes. And what's the muscle on the opposite side of that joint doing? What state is it in when you ask the first guy to contract? So it's the next step of design. It's still design though. Still just using the body the way it's designed, understanding the lever system from both sides. I must lengthen first in order to contract, and I've got to be able to contract in order to lengthen. Otherwise, I'm just doing more of the same. Yeah, that was really great takeaway. Is there any other clarity from last week? Cheryl, you got something? Oh, I can't hear you though, but you're not muted. Uh-oh. Do you have a headset that you can use? Yeah, okay, awesome. I love the blue behind you, by the way. I don't know if that's a light in your room or the color of your wall or a backdrop or something, but it's like really good blue. Okay. All right. Lori, did you have any questions from last week while Cheryl's getting her tech up? You're using your phone today, way to get both hand to happen and not let the tech hold you back. There was a question here. Let me give you a pop-up to unmute. Does that help you?
Yeah, thank you. Computer. No, I don't think you unmuted me, so I could say no, I don't have anything to say.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We're just making sure that we have the lay of the land set up from last week so that we can get into when things get into a pickle. And that's, I started today by saying that that's really, I think, recommended for us as practitioners. Go back to what you know about the design and always go there first before letting yourself get down a rabbit hole. What about now, Cheryl?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
All right. Yeah. I guess I just needed some clarity. I went back because I missed the very beginning of your start last week. So I went back and listened to it. And you were talking about the rotator cuff. And I guess which was the part of the rotator cuff? Was it the supra or the subscapularis that does the guarding of the glenohumeral joint? Was
supra or the subscap? Sorry, the subscap does the guarding.
So then the medial rotation was the supra.
No, that's also subscap.
Oh.
So that I'm not sure if this is where you're going, Cheryl, but all the muscles in the rotator cuff, 3 of the muscles in the rotator cuff do rotation.
Right.
All of them also do a form of stabilizing, either guarding the joint or reinforcing the capsule or stabilizing in movement. So they all have this like dual role. We talk a lot about the rotator cuff by name because it does this rotation, and it does. And my emphasis for all of us is to focus on the stabilizing part, the capsule, the supporting of the capsule, the reinforcement of the joint, the stabilizing in movement, because that's when things go wrong in the rotator cuff.
Right. Okay. So then it's the subscapularis that does the medial rotation.
Subscap. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, good. I'm glad you got that clear. I know I misspoke the week prior, so that was all a kerfuffle, and that doesn't help either, but it's always good to review. And yeah, so the alignment matters. We're going to talk alignment today too, as we get into the second type of alignment for sure. Anything else coming up from last week? I love the cliffhanger. I don't think we've had a cliffhanger before on Tuesday training, maybe one other time, but it's not common that we do this. So it's kind of exciting. I was like waiting all week. I usually wait anyway, because I love our time together. Okay, so let's talk about hyperextension of the hip. And again, when we talk about movement and lever system, super valuable to just go with what you know. So hyperextension of the hip is a joint action in the hip. What's the opposite of hyperextension of the hip? What joint action?
Flexion.
Flexion. Yep, good. Really valuable to just do that. Like repeat what you know, give yourself a head start with an A+ out of the gate, rather than bog yourself down with data and start to have that little bit of panic that can sometimes happen. So we're working with hyperextension and flexion of the hip, starting from our neutral position. Of course, there's no joint action, and it's almost helpful that Murph's a mess because you'll be able to see the movement happen right here in this ball and socket joint, head of the femur, and the acetabulum is the bony landmark on the pelvis. Let's see if I can get him a little bit tighter though. Is anybody else enjoying this time of year, and especially in places where there's Halloween decorations? I've seen so many skeletons in grocery stores and restaurants and bars and all kinds of places, and I am the anatomy geek. I'm like, that's not anatomically correct. He doesn't have enough vertebrae. That's not anatomically correct. There's more ribs in there. That's not anatomically correct. There's 2 arms on there's 2 bones in the forearm. I'm like the not fun girl at the this time of year, but I love it. I love all the skeletons. Okay, so flexion of the hip. What muscle is the main guy that does that? Psoas. Yep. Back to neutral. Hyperextension of the hip. What muscle is the main guy that does that?
Glute max.
Glute max. Perfect. See, we're already A students, so we got this. Great. So using the concept that we just came came to review about you must lengthen a muscle to contract it, and it must be contracted to lengthen. So meaning it's got to go through its role in the lever. It's got to go from neutral doing nothing to lengthening and then contract. It's got to be able to do all of that for it to be a working partner in the joint activity, for sure. And we called out the muscles, the Psoas and the Glute Max, being the strongest hip flexor and the strongest hyperextender of the hip, which means in their joint actions, the action being contraction, that's when those muscles contract in the action that we called out. And that means that in its opposite action, you must already then jump to, oh, then it's lengthening in that position. Okay, so then we're back to the rubber band idea. So in the human body, as human habits go, are we more often in a neutral hip, a flexed hip, or a hyperextended hip? What joint action are we using most?
Flexion, I would
Hip
think.
flexion. Yep, we're all doing it right now. Exactly, those of us that are here. So hip flexion is the action that's happening. And when we're doing this from a static position, like we're all seated right now, and some of us are sitting in optimal alignment and most of us aren't, including me, is the muscle, I know, right? I was just saying this to so many practitioners. I'm like, you guys, we are talking about this topic and we're not sitting optimally. So of course our clients need our support, like, of course. So we're in hip flexion most often, and it's not an active hip flexion, meaning we're not actively flexing. We're flexed and we're holding. And it becomes passive, especially when we're no longer sitting upright, when we're doing a little bit of a lean, or our foot's up on the desk, or we're crossing our legs, or whatever we're doing. So anytime we take our bodies out of that optimal alignment that we talked about last week, it changes the muscle's ability to contract fully in action. And additionally, when we're sitting in hip flexion, but it's passive, it's not an action of the hip that's currently happening, it just happened and then it stopped. What ends up happening in this position, well, you tell me, what happens to the muscle fibers of the psoas in this position? What happens?
They shorten.
They shorten. Are they shortening because they're in an active contraction, or are they shortening and just sort of hanging out?
Hanging out.
At first they shorten because it's actively contracted. As soon as we go to sit down, the psoas must contract to make that happen. Glute max must lengthen to let that happen. And then once we sit, especially if we're a little casual about it, it's called shortened muscle, but it's called on the slack, meaning that the origin and insertion are moving closer together, but not from an active contraction with muscle spindles. So when the muscle spindles actively contract, that return from origin, from a lengthened position or from a neutral position, when the origin and insertion move toward each other, the spindles overlap each other. I like to talk about it like a deck of cards, right? So the origin and insertion spindles are nice and long, either from neutral or from a lengthened position. Origin and insertion move back toward each other, and then they sort of overlap in the middle. That's what the bulk is in a muscle when we contract it. That's what we see. We see the head of the deck of cards, the mound in the middle of the deck of cards as the spindles lay over top of each other. When the muscle's not contracting or lengthening, the spindles are just neutral length. My fingers aren't quite the right size to fit them all like perfectly, but they're just the regular length. And then when they lengthen, they pull apart just a tiny bit. Okay, they don't think about breaking or anything like that. We're just talking about length of spindles. Lengthening, returning back to contraction is the deck of cards. Okay. But once we have the action of the deck of cards coming together in the mound, the origin and insertion actively moving towards each other, and that contraction firing, once the contractions happened, it's over. Unless we're resisting or bearing weight. Now, some could say, well, you're bearing your own weight, and that's true. But most of what's happening once we sit down already happened. There's a bit of tone left in the muscle for sure. There's a bit of tone left in every muscle, or we'd be puddles on the floor. There's a little bit of action happening in that muscle, but for the most part, the origin and insertion have just moved towards each other. And now the deck of cards is sort of there midway, nothing really happening. Nothing happening in either direction, just sort of origin towards each insertion. They call that being on the slack. When there is a joint action that has occurred outside of neutral, right? We know that the hip joint in neutral, I want to take his arm off, but that feels abusive. We know that the hip joint in neutral looks like this. And so we're no longer in neutral, but we're not actively contracting. It's that the origin and insertion of the muscle have moved toward each other, and the muscle that does that action is shortened, but it's not actively contracting and, you know, in a rotation of some sort of lever. It's just sort of held there. So whenever we take a joint out of neutral and into a position, the muscles then are on the slack. Manual body workers and massage therapists know this term a lot, because, and you might have experienced this even with a trainer actually, when the practitioner moves the body, but the person's sort of passive, not sort of, person's passive, they're not doing anything, but we take their arm and we move it. Yoga teachers do it actually in Shavasana all the time, right? People are, you know, out like scarecrows, and you take their arms and you just move them gently towards each other to reduce the impulse of the nervous system and bring their arms closer together. You adduct their shoulders, but they didn't adduct their shoulders. What you did was move the joint for them. There's no active contraction happening. You took the muscle on into what's called on the slack. So that's the phrase of, yes, there's a joint action happening, but it's not an active movement of the lever. Okay, now this is important to know, because when we have sitting as our example today, and any other position that we hold in our body repetitively, we've got to recognize from a functional perspective that those muscle spindles are shortened, but they're not getting stronger. They're just shortened. If they're shortening, it's the opposite of lengthening. So now we're back to our idea about the lever system. So that means then that from a lengthened time sitting or choosing hip flexion, that now means that this muscle here, the main hip flexor, is shortened. And this muscle that does hyperextension of the hip, that is the lengthener of hip flexion, is lengthened, 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 lengthened. Anytime we hold a muscle in a position of either lengthened or contracted for 90 seconds or more, it changes it for better or worse. So the glute max now in a seated position is this. And we might think, oh, that's perfect. As soon as we stand up, it's going to bring it back. And as soon as you go into hyperextension of the hip, it's going to contract and the deck of cards is going to fold back over each other. Sure. In an ideal world, that is exactly how it's designed. I hope that you got there for sure. But what we now need to consider is that the psoas that allows the glute max to do that work, the psoas is now in a perpetual shortened position and not getting stronger by that work, just shortened, just shortened. So that's a perfect example of when the lever doesn't work the way it's meant to in its action. Shortened is sometimes too short, not too short like there's something wrong with the muscle, but shortened like it forgot what it's supposed to be doing. It forgot its role in that elastic quality of both and, like we do when we're walking, for example, because it's just been held in a lengthened position or held in a shortened position. We could easily complain about glute max in the same context. It could be that the psoas has no problem at all lengthening, and it's actually grateful for the opportunity to lengthen, but glute max has been so lengthened for so long, he forgot how to contract. We don't know yet, but we know that there's a possibility on either side of that lever for that lever to not be equal because of that sustained hold of those muscle spindles in that position. One on a slack of shortened, and not stronger. That's the key. On the slack doesn't mean stronger. It doesn't mean contracted like, oh, I'm so strong in my core now because I sat all day. We know that's not true. But why isn't that true? Why aren't we stronger in our core if we sit all day? If our hip flexors are contracted all day long, why aren't we stronger?
Because we slouch.
Because we slouch and because the muscle's on the slack.
Yeah. Well, wait,
it's not
you're talking
working.
about only hips. Got it. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
thinking.
Well, those muscles aren't working. So they're just
Right.
They're sitting idle.
They're
And they,
sitting idle.
they actually stiffen. Like I think about like when I carry books or something in my arm for a long period of time, and then I put that bag of groceries down, and then my arm is like, my elbow feels really stiff, right? I mean, it's not like I was contracting it, and I mean, I guess I was working it a little bit by holding that object, but I mean, it was in a position that didn't move. It was like almost isometric, or not isometric, but yeah. So then it wasn't like, it stiffens, and trying to open that arm back up again, it's like,
Yep, that's exactly right. And the key there is the 90 seconds, because you held it in a shortened position for a period of time that changed the tissues. That's really key, which means the tricep lengthened just as much as the
bicep contracted.
Yep, just as much as the elbow flexors. Exactly. So these are great examples. Like, oh yeah, when I hold something in a position for a long period of time, it's like, to undo that, because the lever is not just like, hey, ready to go. The lever is like, what have you done? We need to like recalibrate here a little bit.
Does it have something to do with like fluids?
Yeah, it has something to do with fluids. It has something to do with chemicals and hormone responses. It has something to do with the nervous system. It has something to do with, yes, there's lots that go into that for sure. And it's super helpful to know. And like, I'm wildly entertained by all of that all the time. And for today's purposes, I think it's just helpful to know it was longer than 90 seconds. The lever system's now imbalanced. I have to address that. I deal with it when I sleep. Deal with what, Natasha? So when we are in this idea of shortened or lengthened for any particular length of time, whether it's shortened and actively contracting, Cheryl, like in your example, the muscles that flex the elbow were actively contracting. Or if we're talking about not actively contracting and just static, what was the word that you used? Cheryl, you gave a great word.
Isometric.
Oh, idle was the I word. Oh. When they're just sitting idle, they're in a shortened position, origin towards insertion, but they're not holding a bag of groceries. And again, I have had conversations with other practitioners like, well, yeah, but isn't the psoas holding you up? Only if you're in optimal alignment. Otherwise, we're back to what we started with last week. Unless the joints are in optimal alignment in their action, the muscles can't contract fully. So unless we're sitting optimally aligned, the psoas isn't getting stronger from doing that job, or can't get stronger from doing that job. And because we're sitting idly and not actively flexing the hip, it's not going to get stronger than it did when you first sat down optimally. So both of those, the alignment and being on the slack and sitting idle, I'm going to totally use that now, Cheryl, are both things to consider when we're talking about sustained joint actions because of how the lever system is designed. One must contract for the other to lengthen, and the other one must lengthen to allow the contraction, and vice versa, right? Okay, so now what we have after sitting is we have a pattern of shortening in the psoas, not stronger for the, not better for the wear, not worse for the wear, but not stronger for the wear. And now we have a lengthened glute max tissues. And now we're supposed to walk. Sure, everybody just jump right back and do your job. You glute max, you're supposed to contract, and you psoas, you're supposed to lengthen, even though you're not strong enough to even be contracted. And remember, a muscle must contract before it lengthens, and it has to lengthen in order to contract. So now that's not happening in those two main muscles. They've been held in a position. They're not actively going back and forth in the lever. Their elasticity is a little challenged. They've been changed by being held for 90 seconds. So now we get to,
let alone 8-hour days of people working. You know?
I know, right? 90 seconds, 8 hours, tomato. No, it's longer is not better.
Yeah.
It's not like the change happens after 90 seconds and then you're done. It continues to compound the longer you hold the body in any position, for sure. It's one of the reasons why For those of you here who are mastery practitioners, it's why it's like repatterning. You must choose optimal alignment. You got to know what that is, because it's the biggest piece that folks can do for themselves that we're responsible to share with them. I really, I love being a practitioner. I love having a full schedule. I love making a good living. I love all of that for you as well. And I don't want people to be dependent on me for them to live comfortably in their body. That's not the way I want to make a living and serve people. I want to serve them when it's really needed through our interdependence, not because of their lack of knowledge. Right? I want to teach them what they need so that they can sit 8 hours at a computer and not need something else to be comfortable, that they can take care of it, or they can do something during those 8 hours, etc. And so we talk about remedies in that. Okay, so now we're on to, all right, something's a little off, and hyperextension of the hip may not happen as soon as I stand up. And again, we're only talking right now about psoas and glute max. Adductor magnus plays a big role here too, because of his relationship with psoas. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole yet, but that would be a rabbit hole to go down when you're troubleshooting how the lever is not functioning the way it's designed to. So that's when you know more anatomy and more complexities. And again, I'm going to emphasize this, I'll say this 1,000 times if that's what it takes. Please work with the way the body is designed first before making it more complicated, because it doesn't have to be more complicated. Sometimes simple is the solution. Go with that. Make it easy for you and easy for them, instead of you getting all twisted about and them getting all twisted about. It's the place where I see practitioners who are solving complex pain patterns miss the solution because they start making up shit, is what they call it. Like they go into like never land of possibilities and ideas without really knowing how they're connected, or even if they are connected, and then not knowing what to do about that either, because now they're kind of overwhelmed. Don't overwhelm yourself. Make it simple. Sometimes the solution is simple. When it's not, you'll know, but not if you made it hard first. Like it gets to be easy first. And then when it's complex, go a little more complex. In order to go complex though, you've got to be able to piece things together without jumping to conclusions too fast, too soon. That's again, where I see practitioners take themselves out of the game prematurely. Okay, so now we're back to when to intervene when the lever system's not working. So just given, and Cheryl's like, I'm not sitting for 90 seconds ever again, never again. So now that we know just that about the lever and the 90-second hold, and a muscle's need to contract in order to lengthen and has to lengthen to contract, what would you say then somebody needs for glute max to fire, given what we just talked about with its relationship to psoas and extended hip flexion? What would you say would be the intervention right now, just given what we know now?
I'd say to lengthen the psoas.
And strengthen the glute.
Yeah,
Great.
Lengthen first. Yeah.
Great. So we're back to move the lever. And so how would you do that? It's absolutely correct. And now give me practicality. How would you lengthen the psoas? How would you contract the glute?
I'm going to pull from yoga, obviously, in a either high lunge or a low lunge.
Okay, great. What else? Love it. What else?
For strengthening the glute, there's so many ways. I mean, just activity, and and there's so much resistance bands and things that you could use to strengthen the glutes.
Okay, great. Lori, did you have one?
Yeah, something easy. Like, I don't know if people are going to drop into a lunge or grab a resistant band, like stand up, stand up optimally, and take whatever leg behind, right? So say you're standing up in mountain pose or Tadasana, toes are forward, take your right leg straight behind. You can have the ball of your foot on the floor, contract your right glute max, and that should lengthen your right psoas. Like people can do that, just stand up, take a leg back, contract, lengthen.
Okay, I love all of these answers. And here's the common theme that I heard between them: simple and targeted. Simple and targeted. So if somebody here, maybe not one of us or somebody watching on the replay was like, well, but if that was going to work, then why can't they just walk? Like, what's the problem? Because it's not simple and it's not targeted. Walking is a dynamic action that involves a whole lot of work. So while hyperextension and flexion of the hip are happening in walking, so is a whole host of other stuff. And unless we have the ability to access all the parts of walking or all the parts of any dynamic action, we're going to default to whatever's available, which doesn't mean we've restored the lever. That's why people who sit all day, but then walk in the evening, come home with low back pain, because the lever didn't work, because just getting back to hyperextension and flexion of the hip didn't restore the lever. So you all caught that actually, and that's beautiful. In order to restore this joint's lever after a long day of on the slack psoas action, sitting idly, in order to restore that, I've got to target both the psoas to lengthen and glute max to contract. And I don't know which one yet, because again, we've talked about it could be either or, but I do know that I get to target just those two muscles and it gets to be simple. And also static action, meaning no jumping jacks, no running in place, no walking up a flight of stairs. Like, that's dynamic action that requires a whole host of other muscles in that reciprocal inhibition relationship we talked about. The more muscles our brain needs to keep track of to work, the more patterns have to be there for those muscles to work. And what we've established here is that the pattern of movement is interrupted. So I'm not going to make it more complex and more dependent on those muscles to be in the pattern. I'm just going to slow it way down and just go right to those muscles and have them do like a rubber band action. Psoas, are you lengthening? You are? Good job. Glute, are you contracting? You are? Good job. Now let's try them both. Lengthen, contract, lengthen, contract. You guys are both, you're playing nice? Okay, good. Now let's go walk. Okay, and like literally in that arrangement.
So activation.
Activation of both the action and the reciprocal response to that action, lengthening. Notice I didn't say, yeah, Cheryl, stretch them. No, right? Stretching isn't the answer. It's activating the joint action with both prime movers equally playing. Yeah, super great, super great. And it doesn't have to be from yoga. I love yoga. You guys know I love yoga. It doesn't have to be from yoga. You don't even have to be a movement practitioner to do that. You just have to know where the muscles are and what they do, meaning how they contract, and then put the body in that joint action. Not put the body in that joint action, because that would be passive. Instruct your client to put their body in that joint action, like you were walking us through, Lori. Doesn't have to be from a yoga position. It could just be standing and hyperextend the hip and then get her done, right? But you got to watch both sides of the lever, though, not just stretching, not just contracting, because here's the next place I'll take us. Most of the time, when there is a pelvic imbalance or a sacral issue, most of the time, even though you are targeting the psoas and the glutes to activate on both sides of their lever, when there's a structural misalignment, they can't, even when you've targeted them and done a really good job. So I told you last week that there's two different types of alignment to consider, and there is. The first is whether or not our joints are moving in alignment. Are we sitting optimally and holding all of our disc spaces up and our pelvis in the right position with floor balance curves? Are we standing with our hips in neutral or not? Right? So what does the visual assessment tell us about the person's chosen alignment? Are they in alignment when they're moving? So if you are a movement practitioner or you're watching your clients put their shoes on after their session with you, right? Are they going into hip flexion to reach down for their shoe, or are they doing something super twisty turvy to get down there to put their shoes on? That'll tell you whether or not they can do hip flexion, right? Watch what they're doing, watch their movement patterns. So if they're doing it visually correct, like hip flexion, reaching down, putting my shoes on, standing up when I'm done with my session with you, putting my coat on, my rotator cuffs are working equally. I get my arms in the sleeves and I'm good to go. Great. That's one type of alignment. The other type of alignment is what's happening relative to the joints inside the structure under the skin. And that you can only do through assessment. We do that in the method. It's not something I can teach on Tuesday training because I got to watch you do it. But if you don't yet know how to do that, and you are having client issues that aren't resolving, I highly recommend you add that to your skill set, because that was the game changer for me, 100%. I was watching people, again, thinking, oh, maybe I'm supposed to be a yoga teacher to figure it all out. And I love yoga, no shade on yoga teachers whatsoever, but watching them do what looked perfect on their mat didn't super solve the pain. And I was like, how is that possible? Because inside they were out of alignment. So you can put your body in any position and look visually balanced, but it doesn't mean that your sacrum isn't, out of alignment in some way. Whenever two bones meet, there's a joint. Wherever those joints are, there's muscles that move those joints, and the muscles can't contract fully if the bones that they're attached to are out of alignment. Physically, visually, or internally, structurally. The muscles can't contract fully if the bones are out of alignment. And there's two types of alignment to consider. So absolutely use the visual external one first, especially if you're a movement teacher or if you don't have access to measure the structure. And if you don't yet, you get to have that. And that could be the reason. So back to what we said. So I'm just going to recap here what we're up about. If I know that hip flexion is the common idle posture, and there is some issue with glute max not firing, which was what we were bringing up for discussion last week and repeating today. First things first, the body has to be in alignment. Second thing is we get to review what the lever's doing and recognize that this is idly shortened on the slack, and then restore the joint action in both directions by targeting the prime mover of both sides of that joint. And if that still doesn't work, there is a possibility that their internal structure is out of alignment. And it probably would be if they've been in sustained holds for a long time. Here's where now it gets to be like, oh boy, what the freak just happened. When folks who sit, let's just make it simple. Why not? Practice what I preach. When folks sit daily and walk daily, and their low back has discomfort after their walk, what do you think causes that?
The QL.
Okay.
The QL kicking in to help, because because the glute max is not working optimally to do its job, and so the QL is going to come in and help move those legs. I mean, and the QL is attached right along the lumbar vertebra.
Okay. And how does QL? How does QL support glute max action? Does it do the same action as glute max?
Not intended. No.
It doesn't at all. It doesn't do extension. It doesn't do hyperextension of the hip. Right. So QL is, think about the blue rubber band ending at the top of the iliac crest. Just as you stated, Anna, QL is right along the spine, quadratus lumborum, meaning 4. So it's got 4 heads along the vertebra, also at the bottom rib and at the top of the iliac crest. Okay, so it sits like this. Sits like this. Great. In order for a muscle to move a joint, it has to pass that joint. In order for this muscle to do hyperextension of the hip, it's got to cross this joint. This is where hyperextension happens down here. Any muscle, any joint action has to be done by a muscle that crosses that joint. So if you're wondering like, well, what muscle do I target? Is it this, is it that? If you look in an anatomy book, it'll tell you, like, what joints does QL cross? What joints does QL cross? Just by looking, I know my hands are not quite the right.
The vertebra.
the vertebra.
Yeah,
Fine.
this
So-
one.
But it helps. I mean, the glute max, I thought the glute max recruited the QL. It's not that the QL does the movement.
If glute max isn't working, how does it recruit QL to do glute max job?
Well, the origin of QL is up at the top crest, right? I was going to move my lever, my hand,
It's actually insertion. Yeah, it's insertion.
and the glute max also inserts or originates there.
Yeah. So glute max is here. And Natasha, I see your note is QL a stabilizer. So, yep. And so we're going to get there in a second. So glute max is here. QL is here. How does QL move this joint if it's not anywhere attached to this joint? How does it do that?
Good point. I just thought the glute max, I thought the QL, because of where its attachment points are, the shared attachment points with the QL, I thought the glute max just asked the QL to help, and the QL helped.
So cute. So cute. So that's, I love it. And I love that you worked through that, Anna, and I'm going to give you the answer here in a second. QL is also a stabilizer in the torso. It does move the vertebra, and it also holds us upright here. Not too dissimilar to the Psoas, which does hip flexion because it crosses this joint, but it also holds us upright here, right? So muscles do lots of things. And this is where, if you're still learning muscles, it'll feel less easy to follow all of that. So you really need, again, loves, you got to know your joint actions and the muscles that do them, and then the muscles that help do that, right? First going to the opposite side of the joint and getting the muscle that lengthens, and then the other muscles that also help in the party of reciprocal inhibition. Just take it slow and take it steady, but notice that without that, we don't really know how it went wrong. But what we do know is that this muscle does not move this joint. So if it is doing work of hyperextension of the hip, we know that's not the design. And that's where we found the problem. But what I want you to do is get there in that order, rather than be like, oh, QL must be doing something wrong, and that's why glute max isn't firing. We don't know that to be true, because glute max does a different joint action than QL does. We can tell that because we know how the body's designed. And you can just look at a picture in a trusted source and review that. Okay. And so Anna, something that you said was really interesting. You said you thought that glute max would ask for help. That's like super cute. Most of the muscles in reciprocal inhibition lean on their synergists to do the job. Not synergist meaning a muscle that also helps out in that joint action. So remember, in the lever system, it's one guy contracts, one guy lengthens. In reciprocal inhibition, it's one guy contracts as the lead singer, and a bunch of support backup singers are there helping him do it. Okay. And the synergists still cross the same joint. Every joint that's moved has a muscle that crosses that joint to do the movement. They don't like radio down from headquarters. Hey, you guys down there, do the thing. They got to be crossing the joint. Makes it really helpful for us to know that, because we can then just look up in a book and be like, wait, where does that muscle cross again? Oh shit, he's not even supposed to be doing that job. Or, oh, he's supposed to be doing that job. Why isn't he doing that job? So if you look at where the muscles cross a joint, it'll help you with that information. Even if you don't know the name of the muscle, you can still palpate it, point to it, activate it, like we talked about when we're targeting a muscle to do its job.
Okay, then I'm going for the D6.
Well, don't change your mind now.
Okay.
Let's just go with it. But notice, Anna, like, I love that you're so honest all the time. Notice how when we don't know, we just make up stuff. All right, well, then I'm just going to guess a different one. All right, I'm just going to guess a different one. Totally fine and normal. There's no judgment or criticism here. But this is where I'm appealing to you as practitioners to pause. Don't make up shit. You will run down a rabbit hole for the whole 60 minutes your client's with you, not really knowing where you're headed and not getting to the answer. Just pause. Don't make it up. Just work through it. Just pause. Yeah. Okay. So And what we did so far, again, we aligned the body so it's optimal. We know the main guys who do the job. We checked out to make sure they're doing their job. Oh, they're not. We're going to target them to get them back on power to do their job. That might fix it. That might be plenty. Then we fast forwarded to a person who doesn't have that happening, or they have discomfort when a joint's supposed to be doing the job. Their discomfort somewhere else. Why? QL is a stabilizer, and it also moves the lumbar vertebra for sure. And you called it, Anna, because of where it attaches, it does have a relationship with the iliac crest for sure. Doesn't have a relationship with hyperextension of the hip though. And because we talked about movement, dynamic movement, there's lots going on. I don't recommend that we assess things from a dynamic action. I recommend that you pause people in position and see if the joint action is happening from a static position rather than complex. Go ahead, Lori, what's going on?
I thought I had the Synergist of Glute Max, but I don't, because you said the Synergist also would cross the same joint as the main muscle guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking your question about why we have pain in our lower back, like what's help? Wait a minute. I was thinking, I'm a little down the rabbit hole
Okay. All
with
right.
muscles, so I'm just I'm gonna let it go.
Okay, I think thank you for the feedback, because I might have confused the situation by overstating that all muscles cross the joint that they move. Synergist muscles mostly cross the joints that they move, and they're very close to the joint that they move, if not. So
okay.
that was a little bit of an I before E except after C comment.
Yeah.
So sorry for oversimplifying it and making it complicated. What do you know the Synergist to Glute Max to be? You said you thought you knew them and now you don't. What do you know the Synergist to Glute Max to be? Are you overthinking it?
I am. Yeah, I am a little bit. I don't know if
Lori, what about meet and min?
Do they do extension of the hip though? They don't.
No,
they do lateral.
No, they don't, but they cross the joint and they're kind of there. And people walk at 10 and 2. So that means
but that's that.
Okay.
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
What about? But if they've got lower, so I keep going back to Gina, why they would have lower back discomfort, right? So yeah, so that's where I keep going back to. And the muscles like the erector, spinae, is that lower back pain?
Okay, let's slow down just a smidgen.
I'm all over.
All right. So the muscles so you're right, Anna. Glute, med, and min do cross the joint too. I can see where you guys would go with that. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Okay. So I see where that can be confusing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, this is what I'm hearing. Reciprocal inhibition. I would add this in. I stated it last week and then I sort of brushed over it today. Reciprocal inhibition is important to learn. So we've talked so far about the lever system, the main guy that contracts and the main guy that lengthens on the same joint action. And then you do get to know the muscles of reciprocal inhibition. You do get to know the guys that help, for sure. It requires more memorization, but if you can do lever prime movers, you can do reciprocal inhibition of things too, okay? So just because a muscle crosses a joint doesn't mean it does all the action at that joint. And it's trickier at a ball and socket joint because there's 360 movement available. So that's not a blanket statement at a 360 joint, where it would be somewhere else like at the elbow, or could be somewhere else like at the elbow. So go ahead, Cheryl. Thought?
Well, I'm just wondering if it could be the TFL, because if the TFL does hip extension, too, doesn't it? It's like decelerates hip extension. So could it be the TFL trying to help out or take over?
You mean as far as why there would be low back pain, or as far as the reciprocal inhibition of that joint?
Yeah. Well, it's taken over the job for the glute max. Like it's, I don't know. Yep.
I love where you're going with it. So when we know muscles, so this is what I'm hearing, Cheryl, when we know muscles and we know what they do, we can quickly get to who's helping out the main guy who isn't doing his job. So Anna, your comment about, did Glute Max go and call for help from somewhere else? He would call for help from his synergists. First, because they're also part and parcel of the job. So they're part of the solution for sure. And that is, I'm realizing now as we're talking, I would want you to pause and go through reciprocal inhibition with more depth first. I was starting to take you into spiderweb land, and it's too soon, and that's okay. Reciprocal inhibition is where you guys get to go if you're troubleshooting, for sure. Okay, so I love what you brought up, Cheryl, that TFL has a main job. His main job is not to help Glute Max do hyperextension of the hip. So his main job gets to be considered. His main job, what's he up to over there? And there's other muscles who have secondary roles. They have a main job, but they have secondary roles. Those secondary roles are largely synergistic roles. They're helping out in this action to happen, for sure. Hamstrings are another support staff for hyperextension of the hip. They're the next go-to, if you will, for hyperextension of the hip. So what's happening at the hamstrings, right? And then as soon as you find a synergist, let's say, for example, hamstrings, as soon as you find hamstrings are meant to be helping Glute Max contract, are they? Are they overdoing it? Are they underdoing it? And then what's on the other side of their lever? What's happening with the quads, right? And oh, one of the quads actually supports the psoas. Now we might be in a tangled web between and a host of reciprocal inhibition family of cousins who are needing to be addressed. I would absolutely invite you guys to go there first before where I was going to take you right now. It's just one more step down the line.
Gina, can you just, that sounded like a great obstacle course that we just went through.
Obstacle course.
So you're saying the hamstrings then is synergistic to the glute max. And the, of course, the opposite lever to the hamstring is the quads.
Right.
And then the quads link up to the psoas.
Well, and then I would ask you, Anna, how do the quads link up to the psoas? And now we're back into, I'm just gonna, just in the interest of time, I'm just gonna cap it here for us. Now we're into, do you know your muscles? Like, do you know quads? Do you know what they do? So we want to know the muscles and the actions that they create, meaning when they contract, what joint do they move? And one of the quads, not all four, but one of them.
Rectus, femoris.
Yep, exactly. One of them is the synergist to psoas in a different action than the other quads. So we would want to know that, like, oh, now I'm into hip flexion, and who does that? And is rectus femoris involved in that? Is he doing his job? Is he helping? Because again, at first, we're still in, are you lengthening when you're supposed to lengthen, and are you contracting when you're supposed to contract? First thing we did so far is lever system, the main guy that does this, the main guy that does that, and are they trading and playing on that seesaw fairly? And then you take it a next step. Is everybody who's supposed to be on the seesaw on the seesaw? And then you address accordingly as well. So that I love the obstacle course idea, Anna. That's exactly what just happened. And I would take that there, which is a more sure bet than just tossing out like, oh, I'm just going to throw in deep six here just for the hell of it. See what I mean? because then now you're in a different joint action doing different stuff that's not going to answer what you're trying to solve. So stay with it and stay with the design, and then widen your lens and pick up more, widen your lens and pick up more, rather than darting all over hoping to find the answer.
So then the lower back pain, Gina, because I've been blaming the QL forever. The poor So the lower back pain then is coming out of the originating from the psoas. And
I don't know that that's true, but what I do know is that the lever system that's meant to do equal parts hip flexion and equal parts hyperextension of the hip when walking couldn't be doing that, or there wouldn't result in back pain.
Right,
so
but then the question remains what's causing, and I know it's not a one thing, but what is primarily causing the back pain then, if it's not?
Hold on. What's primarily causing the back pain is that the lever system to do that joint action of hip flexion and hyperextension isn't.
And it could be different for different people, right? I mean, it could be, right, could be a hamstring that's shortened. I find with myself, because that happens to me sometimes, and I find that if I stretch my quads, it releases the tightness in my lower back for me. Like, I've noticed that.
So what I just heard you say, Cheryl, is that you stretch your quads. So you lengthen rectus femoris, which is also involved in whether psoas is lengthening. And when those two muscles lengthen, it allows QL to contract. So now hyperextension is available again. And so now the low back pain starts to go away. It's exactly what we just walked through today. It's a great example. And so, Anna, it doesn't mean that QL isn't the culprit in your particular pain. The question is, how did QL become a problem? Because the other guy who's supposed to be doing it isn't. That's the first place you go. The guy who's supposed to do the job should be doing the job. Because if the guy who's supposed to do the job is doing the job, there is no pain. We can point the finger at QL till the cows come home, and you could be correct. And the answer to that question still hasn't been addressed, which is, how did QL get into trouble? Don't blame the guy who's trying to pick up the slack. Blame the guy who dropped the slack, who's supposed to be doing the job, and get back to him and his helper bees.
Oh my God, I just feel like I've got to go back and do module 1. Again.
Yeah. Lori?
You know what I heard that, like, you know, the whole thing, it gets to be easy, because I was right there with you for a second. I'm like, woo! And I'm like, okay, if the lever system isn't working, what are the synergists of the two main guys? I'm like, okay, and then where do they go? Like, does that make sense, Gina, to go to the synergist? Yeah. So Anna, if you want to, like, that's how I just stop myself from heart palpitations, is to keep it right. I'm right. I was right there with you. Yeah. Is to, okay, that's something isn't working there. What are the synergists of these two? And do they, like, we just made a little circle, right? A little loop. Like, where do they connect in some way? Do they all connect in some way?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's more complex cases and deeper rabbit holes, of course. And that's, what we're up to in our mastery track. And that's great. It is where I tend to jump too fast just because I'm more practiced there. So I apologize for giving you guys a moment of heart palpitations there. I go from 0 to 60 pretty quickly when I'm working clinically. So thank you for
part of learning.
What's that, Cheryl?
It's part of learning.
It is, yeah.
Being taken into panic for just a blip.
Right. And then we choose to come out. Yeah.
Well, it makes you want to know, it makes you want to figure it out.
Okay, good. Well, I have the answers. I do have the answers. And there's an effective way to have you walk through that as well so that you can troubleshoot. And here's the key. And Anna, this is for you specifically. Thank you for letting me point it at you. We often want the answers like that. And I promise you, that's not how I got them. And you will get all the answers like that once you walk yourself through the functional anatomy. When you know it backwards and forwards and you can't be duped into picking a muscle group that has nothing to do with what you're up to, when you can't be duped like that from your own thinking, you will solve every problem in front of you. I promise you that's how I got there. Do I want you to have the answer? Yes, I was just about to give you the answer. But it's better for you to strategically walk through the design, because then you can't be taken off track.
No, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Of course, the QL doesn't cross that joint. So how does it move the leg? Yeah, and I've been blaming the QL forever.
Yeah, it is your love-hate relationship with your favorite muscle.
Yeah, and the QL does take a bad rap, man. He's the wild child, as Val nicknamed him, right? He's the wild child, and he's up to all kinds of shit he has no business being in, and yet look how lovely he is to try.
He is.
And what we get to restore is who's supposed to be doing the job. Right? We could take QL out of the pain point repeatedly, but if we haven't restored the joint action, then he's going to jump in again and try to help. And that's back to the design. We've got to know the design and how that operates for sure before we get into like trouble land.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get it. We'll get there. We're getting there.
We're totally gonna get there.
We're totally going to get there. Everybody gets to get there.
Everybody gets to go. Yeah. And for those of you who are here watching on the replay, if you have not yet dived into muscles and you're like, oh my God, I can't even keep up with this conversation, I got to know my muscles. Yes, you get to know your muscles. So we posted last week, the study group is happening for a good 6 weeks. It's complimentary. I'm not even in it. It's part of our graduates who are running that. And I'm hearing great reviews from the value that's coming from doing it together and doing it in community and talking it out like we're doing here. So I just want to make sure that everybody here knows that Muscles and Movement is, you jump in whenever you want to, and the review course is happening and everyone's welcome and it's complimentary.
And that's for graduates, correct?
No,
everybody.
Everybody. Muscles and Movement is for any practitioner on any track. Graduates from my year-long training program are hosting it, and they have already taken the course and they've already applied the information and they're back for review and applying it in a deeper way with more accuracy as well. And so they're a pleasure to host and to scoop everybody up who's interested in Muscles and Movement. You do not have to be a graduate. No? Thanks for letting me clear that up. Yeah, it's just that the graduates are hosting and they're bang up job, I might add.
And all of the links and the details and the schedule and blah, 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 are in the student lounge, the Facebook student lounge. Just scroll down a little bit. You'll see it. It's from last week.
I pinned it. I got.
Oh, yay. Good. It's at the top.
Yeah, it's pinned up there. Yeah, cool. Exactly. Okay. So we're going to leave off here, and we may come back to reciprocal inhibition next week, unless you guys have other questions specifically. And then we might get into more trouble land, because I think that's the right order. So perfect. Yeah. We've got a gentler cliffhanger this week, but more to come next week. And look, we're over time. I could sit here and talk to you guys all day. It would totally make my day perfect. So, but I'll let you go. Thank you for being here. Thanks for all the amazing work you guys are doing out in the world. If you think there's someone else that could value from the information we shared today, please share it with them. Everybody gets to win. Okay. All right. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Bye.